am I wrong to be surprised about North Carolina? Because I would have said North Carolina, Tom Tillis goes down before there's a runoff in Georgia.
Yeah, well, I thought Tillis and Collins were for sure things, and that was because the polling all trended in one direction. So, I mean, I think it's incredibly fair to say that polling was very accurate on the presidential level, but we always see with the margin of error, it swings in one direction. So,
right. The
you
difference
know,
is in Georgia, they were doing organizing, like real organizing.
Right.
And in North Carolina, they weren't. And so this is why it always comes down to it's like,
because I thought the Moral Mondays movement had sort of like laid a foundation, but was there not enough like sort of just actually like there was more polemic organizing rather than sort of actual like
not enough. I think not enough money poured into the North Carolina race.
Not enough ads. I'm just going to say
not enough
projects.
ads.
You just didn't do your job.
Not enough consultants.
No, but really, I mean, this is why it always comes back to, I mean, Doug Jones even said it today. Are you going to be a party that invests outside of election cycles? And are you going to be playing offense and defense? And I think that's what Georgia did was, they were registering voters through Stacey Abrams' project and many other projects on the ground, but they were also really defending their polls. I mean, it was in Gwinnett County, there's a huge operation. They raised a ton of money in the last couple of months to protect folks at the polls and really speak to communities, newer immigrant communities, and expand their language program because there's a big Bangladeshi community in Gwinnett County. And so it was fascinating to see the kind of work that they were doing in Georgia versus sort of like the basic voter outreach work that some of the other states were doing.
And I hope, just quickly, Sam, I've been kind of banging this drum and I'm not sure it's realistic, but if Perez is under consideration for a cabinet spot seriously and there's an opening at the DNC, I would love if Stacey Abrams took over just because, like, at least she could, what were you saying?
I wouldn't.
You wouldn't?
No.
Well, she could copy some of those models. I mean, like, I'm not saying, oh, she's going to be some great progressive. I'm not being realistic with Joe Biden, or I'm trying to be realistic with Joe Biden heading it. Like, there's grassroots organizing that she could bring to that, which I feel like is lacking.
This is a great point counterpoint situation.
I think it's really basic. It's a party. It's not registering voters. And I think what she did is incredible. And I'm not discounting that. And I want to make that very clear. But the party's problems are much, much, much deeper than that. They have to do with a massive amount of conflicts of interest that are sucking up the resources. You have to know how to run a party, basically. And state parties, if I would, for me, I would say pick a state party chair who's been able to do it really well. And there aren't many. Ray Buckley's, like Jane Klebb. I think you should pick a state, somebody who is running a state that's been under-resourced, but has been able to do really great operations to register voters. Yes, exactly. He's done great work in Wisconsin, but being able to take this massive amount of money and infuse it back to, first off, not just infuse it into state parties, but like state parties got to get gutted. Like there's a lot of toxic stuff happening at state levels. Florida's a perfect example. They've gone through tons of chairs. I mean, there's just so much work that needs to be done. And I think if there was a stronger Democratic Party in Florida, we may not be on this situation. But then aside from all that, you got to ban the lobbyists because they're in all of the rules committees and everything that's overseeing everything. And as a result, it's why we're having these toxic fights constantly between the people who are elected to be DNC members from their communities and these folks that were just appointed to basically write themselves checks.
I'll tell you something.
I don't see Stacey Abrams doing that.
Wickler,
will say that's a fair point. Yeah.
Wickler, now obviously I've known Ben for 15 years. He was Al Franken's producer at Air America. And in fact, I've told the story before on air, but I remember I was in our office and Janine would come in later and I was, in the early days, I was there like 15 hours a day before we would go on air because we had a producer who didn't know how to use email. And I was like, this is, he was, he's a good guy, but he was,
what year was this?
This is like 2004. And, he'd come over from TV and he was, older guy. And I'm like, the dude doesn't know he doesn't know how to use email. He doesn't he's not pushing, he's not getting me any stories. He's not doing it. He's not doing anything. And, I'm not going to get into the full sort of like insanity that was at Air America, but word got back to him that I was, sort of complaining to the higher ups. And he came in the next day and he's like, I got a story for you. I'm like, okay. And he literally handed me a cutout op-ed from the New York Times in paper and put it on my desk. I'm like, is this a joke? I was like, this is like, my grandma is sending me shit like this. It's Ann Landers, but more or less the same stuff, like the same theory here. And I remember I was just like, I don't know how to deal with this. This is very early on in Air America. And I walk down the hall and I walk into Franken's office and the entire wall, like it's like a 20-foot long grid and they've got guests lined out. And I'm like looking at this thing, and it was like literally I had walked into like Valhalla, and it was just like there was that, sort of the soaring music, and there was like the golden light, and there's this massive grid on the wall with like shows planned out for like weeks in advance, and just sort of like topics, and I'm like, and I went up to Ben and I'm like, dude, are there more of like people like you somewhere? and that's how I found Josh Orton, who is somebody he knew from Madison. And Josh, came in and out of plane in a suit and showed up with his rolling. That's basically it. If you want to get hired by me, show up in a suit. I mean, that's how I hired Matt. Matt showed up and he had a sport coat and a vest on. I was like, Jesus.
Had my wool suit on.
Yeah,
no
exactly.
way. Are you serious?
Huh?
Seriously?
I haven't worn it since.
Oh yeah. No, I've never seen Matt wear anything even remotely close to that. But I was like, anybody gonna show up like dressed like that in here? That's the good starting point. But so Wickler, the thing I like about Wickler as that in that position is even when he was running for Wisconsin, I was just like, really? Like he's not a guy who was in the network there. Mm-hmm. He's from Madison, but he wasn't like a longtime Democratic operative there. That was the first thing, as far as I know, that he ever ran for. He was at Avaz, he was at Move On. He's been on like these outside groups, but he was not a longtime Democratic operative. And somehow he managed to win that campaign to become chair of the Democratic Party in Wisconsin. And then, I from a results and a communication standpoint, like, I don't know what you could say, it's not like there's a huge apparatus in favor of Democrats there. It's very iffy. Even, Evers is there, but you still have a very hostile legislature. You have a hostile Supreme Court. They were managed to drive turnout in the middle of an epidemic, and they were, he would be a good choice. He's not somebody who's coming from, let me put it this way. He doesn't have a lot of baggage, which is always the problem with people who are coming from within inside an institution, it seems to me. But
part of it, I'm also sitting here thinking like we can't lose him in Wisconsin because that's an extraordinary amount of work and he just started there. I don't know. There's this other side of it too, which is labor has been zapped. Actually, my opening of the show, I specifically talk about this, so it's very fresh in my mind. But there's three things the Democratic Party could do that could completely revive the party immediately. And it's not risky. And I don't think Joe Biden really has a choice now because he needs a Congress to work with him. He needs to elect down ballot to work with him. And I think it's, get rid of the Clintonian, like insider trading, people who are using the DNC as a laundromat for their money. Invest in state parties, not like sending them $4,000 like Perez did. And he's like, oh, I invested in state parties again. No, rebuild these parties, find new leadership, gut them, change the rules, do real work, stuff that we worked on in the Unity Reform Commission. We presented and then they refused to do it.
Have a 10-year or a 5-year or an 8-year plan instead of like a 6-week plan.
Yes. And then that's exactly. And then the third thing is bring back labor. You have to get rid of the conflicts of interest and bring back labor. There should be a labor quota. Whether or not they're all the labor leaders we love, we still have to have those voices in the party. And they were, sucked out of the party in the early 80s, and they really haven't been able to get back. So I don't know. I don't think Joe Biden has a choice. I think he actually has to find somebody who understands the mechanisms and where the bad actors lie and the rules. And that's something Stacey Abrams does not. I know that. I mean,
no. I know you're right. I mean, I was, I guess, thinking very small and expecting very little of the Biden administration.
I think he has to do something. I don't think he has a choice. He's also a party man. This is the thing a lot of folks don't know. Unlike Obama, who didn't give a crap about the party, Joe Biden is like a Democrat. Like, he cares about the party. So maybe just for his own selfish reasons of wanting to have a legacy that, you know, in the history to reflect on him achieving things and having Congress, and he needs to do something about this party.